13 years old. It just seems like a gradual process, or a sort of a thought development, and then sometimes when you think something or you believe it, over time you see more examples of it, and you maybe kind of develop your thinking about it, or retreat from some aspects of your thoughts about it. But it becomes a growing theme or a growing narrative, and we seek out experiences or seek out sort of facts that support this kind of growing worldview. And if we're lucky to be open enough, we also evolve in terms of what our sort of framework concept is. So I think I saw different things over time that continue to develop this idea in my mind.
So fast forward to February 2011, which is right now.
Right.
And so how did all of this come together? What made you say now is the time? What made you say now is the subject? Did you just feel it? Did you just know it?
Yes, it's something I've been wanting to do for a while. The timing is always, I think, difficult with an art show, because you're ongoing in this process of creating the work, and you sometimes might feel like maybe now is not the time. It might be, maybe I could continue working and thinking about it for 5 years, but then there's this other sense of urgency that also makes me feel like now is the time. But a lot of the connections between different concepts have been happening for so long that I felt like I wanted to put kind of a point on it, and to combine it and bring it together.
I'd like to ask you about one of the pieces in the show. Do you mind if I talk about some?
No.
My Back is Strong. Now, you did that about 4 years ago, I think. And I have to tell you, I was startled. Not just by the size, and not just by the fact that it was, if not your first piece of sculpture, certainly your first piece of big sculpture. And the terror and the sadness in the piece, that's a hell of a piece. Especially for somebody who's like just coming into making sculpture. You haven't been making, I mean, you've been around sculpture all your life, it's true. Is there anything you want to say about that piece? You don't have to. I mean, you don't have to. It's just a hell of a piece.
This is a fairly large piece, relatively large piece, maybe I think it's about 6 feet across, and it is sort of an abstract piece based on photographs of extensive scarring on backs of slaves. And the piece itself was something that just kind of had to happen, that I had to make, and that came with a certain amount of almost like frenzy while I was making it, but also excitement. And part of that was a feeling, one, of putting your hands on something. It's like touching a scar. It's like touching a network or feeling of scars on a back. And in some ways, I think that by reflecting on the physical aspects of suffering, that's a very physical piece. But I think it's also a very spiritual piece, because it's not supposed to be one person's back. It's supposed to be many backs, and it's supposed to be my back, and it's supposed to be ultimately that, you're looking at a scarred back, but the point isn't my back is broken, it's my back is strong. So it's kind of a moving piece to make, but it's a very, for me, it's a very powerful piece, and I'm happy it's going to be in the show.
You visited the slave castles in Ghana. Now, how did that affect your thinking on the subject of, you were right there where it happened. Could you share some of your experiences in the slave castle?
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine pointed something out to me that I didn't really realize. I don't know if it's true for a lot of people, but he was surprised at my level of identification with the people in Ghana and with the slave experience. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, you know, he mentioned that there have been several books by African Americans who went back and they were very critical of Africa, and I never felt that feeling of separation. I felt very moved when people say welcome home when you're there. And at different steps in the journey, because we also went back into some of the areas where people were walked from more remote areas towards the coast. And you saw like camps where people were chained up. They even had big stones where they were like tied to, and they had carved out like kind of bowls so they could, you know, basically eat. And you just saw this whole progression, and what I felt throughout all of it was not that this is where my ancestors had been. I felt like this is where I had been. And so that feeling of very close identification was the strongest thing about it.
I think we're probably out of time, or will be. So could you give us the address of the gallery and the dates of the show and the name of the gallery, please?
Sure. So the gallery is New Century Artists, and it's at 530 25th Street, Suite 406, and the show is from the 15th of February to the 26th of February.
One more time. What's the address?
It's 530 West 25th Street between 10th and 11th, and it's New Century Artists.
New Century Artists.
Right.
Now, we might be off the air, but I'm going to keep on talking. We might be, okay. Okay, I'm going to keep on talking. He can just fade us out when we're done. But I want you're painting. You paint mostly in oils,
right,
Ramona, and you also paint pretty large,
right.
And you plunged right into it. I mean, you didn't start with teeny tiny paintings, and I mean, you just kind of like, I guess, you needed that whole physical. There's really no explanation why people decide to.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people paint in really broad strokes, and there's a certain physical aspect to it. You take somebody like Cy Twombly, who has like these huge gestures, and that's part of, I think, his experience of painting. It's not that it's like big sweeping physical gestures for me. It's that usually when I find I'm having difficulty painting, when I feel cramped, it's because I'm usually trying to work on a smaller canvas. And why it is that I feel less cramped on a bigger canvas, I don't know.
Yeah, and really, who knows?
I don't. I think people might spend years working within a certain range of sizes, and then they might decide to branch out in one way or the other. But your comfort zone is going to be, for whatever reason, your comfort zone.
Harriet Tubman.
My sister, myself.
My sister, myself. Wow. Thank you very much, Ramona. I really look forward to seeing the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good night, everybody, and thanks for joining us on Link. And I hope to see you at Ramona's show at the what gallery?
New Century Artists.
New Century Artists. Good night. So.
Should I have talked in shorter sound bites?
No, I'm tired of sound bites. Everybody's just